A Dutch ship, loaded with silver, breaks apart on a reef. The people who live through it wash up on an island the size of a couple of football pitches. No fresh water, no shade. The nearest help sits 3,000 kilometers away across open ocean. The commander rows off to look for water and leaves 200 souls in the hands of his deputy, an educated man, a smooth talker, the kind who believes, deep down, that rules were invented for weaker people. Over the next 3 months, on that strip of waterless, treeless sand, something takes shape, slowly and in full view, while nobody on the outside has the faintest idea. 4 months later, the commander comes back. He finds his people dressed in red silk. He finds feasting and good wine, and one man sitting on top of it all with the power of a small king. And he finds a question nobody wants to answer. Where is everyone else? This sounds like fiction, but it is not. Every word comes off the record, out of sworn statements and out of bones dug from the sand 300 years later. Before we go back there, drop a like if you like the kind of history that never made it into the textbooks. And tell me in the comments, had you ever heard of the Batavia before today? Ready? Then let's get into it. The Batavia sails out of the harbour on the island of Texel in the late autumn of 1628. Brand new, launched that same year. First voyage, maiden run to Java. She is a giant for her age, the biggest ship most of the people aboard will ever set eyes on, about as long as a modern passenger jet. 3 masts, the main one climbing 55 metres, and if you stand at the foot of it and look up, the top more or less disappears into the cloud. Her sails would cover 2 basketball courts. More than 20 kilometres of rope run through her rigging, every metre of it stinking of tar and salt, and touch a line in the morning and your hands stay black till nightfall. And the cargo she carries is worth a small fortune. Down in the hold, under tons of lead ballast, sit 12 wooden chests packed with silver coin, worth between them more than 250,000 guilders. The company is sending all that silver east to buy pepper, cloves, nutmeg, the whole spice business, goods that sell back in Europe for 10 times the price. Beside the chests lies something stranger. More than 100 blocks of sandstone from German quarries, the carefully cut pieces of a portico, taken apart for the trip. A baroque triumphal gateway, meant to go up as the grand entrance to the company's castle in Batavia, on Java, the place we now call Jakarta. A monument to Dutch power, crossing an ocean as ballast. The Dutch wasted nothing, honestly. Even the ballast was supposed to turn a profit. In the cabin of one passenger, a merchant called Gaspard Boudin, sits another oddity, an old cameo, a fat agate gem with the Emperor Constantine carved into it. Boudin means to sell it at the court of the great Mughals in India, where this kind of European antique is very much in style. The Batavia is not just a treasure chest, she is a floating fort. 30 guns, iron along the sides, bronze at the bow and stern. The bronze sits there for a reason. Bronze does not throw off a compass, iron does. Sounds like a fussy little technical point, except out on the open ocean it decides everything. A few degrees of error and you sail straight past a destination by hundreds of kilometres. 30 guns, plenty to scare off pirates and the competition. Nowhere near enough against the thing that was actually going to sink her. 341 people are crammed aboard. 2/3 of them crew, sailors and officers, the rigging and sailmen, carpenters, cooks, the ship's surgeons. The rest are soldiers, and a few dozen civilian passengers, and among those, around 30 women and children, all of them heading east, towards spices, and fortunes and a clean start somewhere new. Every company ship runs on a strange arrangement. 2 captains instead of 1. The shipper, the skipper, handles navigation and the day-to-day running of the ship. He knows the sea, the winds, the stars over his head, all of it. Above him, though, stands the opperkoopman, the senior merchant, and that man holds the real power. The merchant sets the course, decides where they stop, controls who eats how much. The skipper can argue all he likes, but in the end, he does what he is told. From where the company sits, it makes sense. The ship is a business first, not a warship. The merchant speaks for the shareholders. The skipper is just hired muscle. The trouble is, on the Batavia, the whole arrangement is about to blow up in everyone's face. Francisco Pelsart, the senior merchant, and so the commander of the whole expedition, is around 35. A sickly man and a closed one. He has spent 7 years in India, most of it in Agra, dealing diamonds and silk at the Mughal court. He has the languages, Dutch, Portuguese, probably a little Persian. He has the court manners and the patience to sit through a long negotiation. He understands money, and better than that, he understands how to make it breed. What he does not understand is the sea, and he does not understand the men he is now sharing a deck with. To this Fleming, a crew is a tool, no different from a pair of oxen hauling a cart. He treats the sailors with polite indifference, the officers with cool reserve. Mostly, he stays in his cabin with his reports and his ledgers. There is an illness he brought home from India, a fever that comes back in waves, and it makes him more distant still. Some days he never leaves the cabin. Some weeks he can barely stand up. And the skipper watches all of this and waits. Arjen Jacobs is everything the merchant is not. A hard, blunt seaman with decades of salt water behind him. He knows every line on the ship, every knot, every creak in the planking that tells him the weather is about to turn. He drinks too much and swears too loud, and he lays into any sailor who lets him down. He is, in short, a perfectly ordinary skipper for the time. Jacobs and Pelsart already know each other, from an earlier run to India, and on that run the whole thing fell apart between them. The merchant dressed the skipper down in public, for drinking and for talking back, in front of the entire crew, in front of the officers. Jacobs did not forget that, and he did not forgive it. Between the high-born merchant and the rough sailor sits a gap of class, and under it, a private hatred. Pelsart has to trust the navigation of a man he does not trust an inch. Jacobs has to take orders from a man he cannot stand. And into that gap steps a third man. Hieronymus Cornelis is about 30, born in Leeuwarden, up in Friesland, though he has spent most of his grown life in Haarlem, running an apothecary's shop. An apothecary back then did a lot more than grind up powders for a cough. The job demanded real chemistry, a working knowledge of the things that heal and the things that quietly do the opposite, the skill to mix tinctures and salves and whatever else the doctors ordered. These men sat among the educated class of their towns, went to universities, read the science of the day, argued medicine and philosophy with the people who wrote it. The Frisian is educated and eloquent, and he can talk almost anyone into almost anything. He knows how to listen, really listen. He can make you feel he understands your problems better than you do. A man like that does not wash up on a ship to the far edge of the world by accident. A little over a year before the voyage, the apothecary's wife had a son. The baby was handed off to a wet nurse, normal enough in well-off houses, where the mothers often did not feed the children themselves. Under 3 months later, the boy was dead. The cause, the father said, was syphilis. The nurse had been infected, he claimed, and had passed it to the baby through her milk, so Cornelius took her to court. The case dragged on for weeks and ate through his money and his good name. Witnesses talked about the sick child and about how the apothecary himself had been behaving. Haarlem was a small place, and by the end of it, everyone knew that Cornelius's son had died of the pox. The shop went under. The customers walked. Creditors started knocking, and the apothecary found himself a step from ruin. But money is not what drove him out of Haarlem. In that same town lived a painter, Johannes van der Beek, who went by the Latin name Terentius. The people of his time thought him a master of still life. He painted jugs and glasses and instruments, plain everyday things, but painted so precisely they looked ready to step off the canvas. Terentius was more than a painter though, a dandy in silk and velvet, with a polished accent, pulling in admirers of both sexes wherever he went. Constantijn Huygens, the poet who served as secretary to the Prince of Orange, and counted among the most powerful men in Holland, wrote about him almost spellbound, saying he had turned the heads of the little sect that gathered round him until they mistook his vices for virtues. A sect, that word was not an accident. Terentius preached something the authorities filed under libertinism. What is God, he would ask, out loud, in public, if the witnesses are telling the truth. Have you ever seen him? What a small thing your God turns out to be. In a Holland where even mild Protestants were hunted for drifting off the Calvinist line, words like that meant a prison cell or a stake to burn at. He believed, or at least the witnesses at his trial swore he did, that God was only an idea, a spirit soaked through everything, not some person up there handing out rewards and punishments. That sin was a thing the clergy invented to keep the masses in line. That what the body got up to had nothing to do with the soul. That pleasure was the natural condition of a human being, and there was no shame in it. And above all, that for the chosen few, the ones who had seen reality for what it really was, everything was allowed. No good and no evil, only the will and the satisfying of it. The Haarlem authorities caught up with Terentius in the end. His trial became the talk of the whole Dutch Republic. Witnesses lined up to describe the orgies, the secret meetings where the painter held forth on his philosophy. They put him to torture, the standard way Dutch law went looking for a confession back then. At the end of January in 1628, the sentence came down. 20 years behind bars. His paintings were ordered burned, which is why exactly one of them survives today, a still life with instruments, hanging in the Rijksmuseum. Everything else, by one of the most talented painters of the Dutch Golden Age, went up in smoke. His students and his friends got hunted too. The mayor of Haarlem put it bluntly. The followers of Terentius had better sell up and leave town, unless they fancied ending up where their master had. A few weeks after all that, a broke apothecary, a former customer of the heretic, maybe a friend, signed on with the East India Company. He took the post of under-merchant, deputy to the senior trader, second man in the civilian pecking order, on a brand new ship headed for Java. Maybe he was running from his creditors, maybe from the inquisitors, maybe just from himself. Frankly, no idea, and neither does anyone else. What we can say for certain is what he carried up the gangplank with him: a head full of poisons, a gift for getting inside people, and a philosophy where, for the chosen, there is no good and no evil. The run from Texel to the Cape of Good Hope eats up several months. Storms break the fleet apart. Ships lose each other in the dark and stumble back together days later. On the Batavia, the bad blood between merchant and skipper only thickens. Jacobs ignores Pelsart's orders to his face. He drinks. He starts fights. Off the Cape, he flat out refuses an order on some manoeuvre, says the conditions are too dangerous, and the merchant has to swallow it, because he does not know the sea well enough to call the skipper a liar. In all that mutual loathing, the under-merchant finds his man. Cornelius and Jacobs start meeting at night over wine. From the confessions squeezed out of them later, you can more or less rebuild those talks. Complaints about Pelsart, about his arrogance, about a system that put a sick merchant over a real sailor. The skipper brought up his humiliation on the last voyage. The apothecary listened. He sympathized. And quietly he fed the fire. Out of the grumbling grew a plan. Take the ship. Get rid of Pelsart and the officers who stayed loyal. Take the silver, those 12 chests worth 250,000 guilders. Sail off somewhere the company would never find them. Set up a little kingdom of their own. And to do all that, they would have to be rid of everyone who might get in the way. Every witness. Anyone who might one day stand up in front of a company court. The women and the children. Them too. To light a mutiny, they needed a spark. Some incident that would swing the crew against Pelsart and hand them an excuse to grab control. Among the passengers travelled a young woman, Lucretia Yarns, wife of that same merchant Bodan, the one with the cameo. She was 27, beautiful, elegant, and travelling alone because her husband had not come on the voyage. She was meant to join him over in Batavia. One night, a pack of masked men shoved their way into her cabin. Faces blacked out with soot so no one could name them, they set on her, and they left her covered in tar and filth. What came after that, the documents do not say, and neither will I. The plotters were counting on Pelsart to come down hard, to punish the whole crew, to set off the very mutiny they were waiting to ride. The merchant did nothing at all. Maybe he was too sick, the fever back on him again. Maybe he was too careful to stir things up without solid proof. Maybe he just had no idea who to blame. Lucretia had not recognized any of them. Every face had been black with soot. One way or the other, it all went quiet. The conspiracy had no spark. What it had was time, and an ocean carrying the ship straight at a disaster. Past the Cape of Good Hope, the Batavia sails on her own. Jacobs has pulled her clear of the rest of the fleet on purpose, officially blaming storms and rough water, though Pelsart smells sabotage. Being alone out there suits the plotters down to the ground. The farther she drifts from the other ships, the easier a mutiny becomes, with nobody around to see it. Now she runs into the roaring 40s, that band of hard westerly winds between the 40th and 50th parallels, named because the wind down there simply never quits. The winds shove a ship toward Java at frightening speed, but they ask for exact navigation in return. Drift too far north and you lose the wind. Drift too far south and you hit land nobody has charted. It is the night of the 3rd of June, 1629, and the ship sits alone in the middle of the open sea. The lookout up at the bow catches a strange, pale shimmer ahead, white foam on the water, as if the waves are breaking on something hard. Jacobs calls it a trick of the moonlight. A heartbeat later, the Batavia slams into morning reef. The reef is part of the Houtman Abrolhos, a scatter of coral islands and rock about 60 kilometres off the western coast of Australia. The name Abrolhos comes from the Portuguese, open your eyes, a warning to sailors. No European has ever stood here before. The charts show nothing but empty water. She drives onto the coral at full speed. The crack of splitting timber sounds like bone going. Men are thrown out of their bunks. Water starts forcing its way into the hold through the torn planking. Pelsart runs up on deck and screams a line at the skipper that he will write into his journal later. What have you done? That your carelessness has put a noose around all our necks. Jacobs answers him flat. How could I have done any better? For hours it is all chaos. The sailors try to haul the ship back off the reef, but every wave just drives the hull deeper onto the coral. They pump, and the water comes in faster than they can throw it out. The carpenters look at the damage and shake their heads. By first light, it is plain. The Batavia is finished. The only thing left to save now is the people. There is one longboat, and it can carry a few dozen people at most. The nearest island, a small, flat smear of sand a few 100 meters off, becomes the target. The evacuation starts. Women and children first, the way custom demands. Then the wounded. Then whoever else can manage it. People go over the side and swim for it. The water is not deep here, but the currents are nasty. Around 40 of them are lost on the way, pulled under by the current or taken by sharks. Some could not swim, and strange as it sounds, plenty of sailors back then never learned. Some get tangled in the wreckage. Some just do not make it. By nightfall, most of them have come through. Close to 300 people all told. The bulk of them packed onto an island the size of a few football pitches. The rest still clinging to the wreck or spread across the smaller islets. Later, they will name that island Batavia's Graveyard. The name turns out to fit. Cornelis stays behind, on the wreck. For 9 days he sits in his cabin because he cannot swim, waiting for the ship to break up under him at last. Cowardice? Maybe, but also arithmetic. The wreck has the supplies, the wreck has the chests of silver, and the wreck is a great deal safer than a sandbank packed with terrified people. Only when the waves start ripping the hull apart do they finally pitch the apothecary into the shallows. He drags himself ashore to the others, soaked and wrecked, but alive and carrying a plan. Beacon Island is no place for anything alive, just a strip of sand the size of a few football pitches. The heat pushes past 30 degrees, the sun burns bare skin raw, and after 3 hours every movement hurts. There is no shelter from the wind that pours in off the ocean and never stops. And worst of all, there is no fresh water. The survivors dig down into the sand, hunting for a well. All they hit is seawater, weeping up through the coral. They try catching dew at dawn, nowhere near enough. They try boiling seawater down in rigs knocked together from kitchen pots. Too slow, far too little. So people start drinking the seawater. It is the oldest mistake the shipwrecked make. Salt pulls the water out of you faster than the drink puts it back, and thirst kills you sooner, not later. They die, one after another. For the first few days, Pelsart hunts for a way out. He sends boats around the nearby islets, and there are dozens of them, scraps of land big and small. They turn up birds, seals, crabs, shellfish, not one drop of fresh water. Cornered, the merchant makes a call that will follow him the rest of his life. In his journal, he writes one word: hopelessness. Then he sets down the rest. No water on the islands, no real hope the ship breaks up and floats the barrels free. Rain, who knows? And finally, the decision itself. They take the longboat and go looking for water, and if they find none, they push on for Batavia. Put plainly, Pelsart takes the longboat and goes. 48 people go with him, mostly officers and sailors strong enough to pull an oar, as many as a 9-meter boat will hold. One woman with a baby. He leaves more than 200 people behind on a sandbank with no water and a promise to bring help. Batavia, the Dutch colonial capital over on Java, is 3,000 kilometers away. The longboat journey takes 33 days. They hug the Australian coast, looking for water the whole way. The land is dry and hostile, and nobody on board has ever seen it before. Now and then they spot smoke, which means people, so they do not risk going ashore. Now and then they find a little cove with water in it, brackish or foul. At last, somewhere around the 23rd parallel south, near what is now Carnarvon, they find a spring. They fill the barrels. Then they swing north for Java. All 48 of them live. They reach Batavia half dead, but breathing. The Governor-General is Jan Pieter Schoon Koen, one of the coldest administrators the whole colonial era ever produced. A man who, a few years back, had ordered nearly the entire population of the Banda Islands wiped out for disobedience. He sends a rescue ship at once, the yacht Saardam. Pelsart is to sail back on her, but the way back takes more than 2 months. Storms, headwinds, trouble with the navigation. They have to thread past the very reefs that took the Batavia down. By the time the Saardam reaches the archipelago, close to 4 months have gone by since the wreck, and on the islands by then, someone else is running things. Back up 4 months. To the morning the survivors woke to an empty horizon, no longboats, no Pelsart, and the bottom dropped out of everything. They had been left behind, stuck on a waterless sandbank with no food and no way out. No ship, no boat, nothing to run to. Thousands of kilometers from the nearest European port, on a coast that did not exist on any map. Some of them fall apart. They weep, they pray, they scream up at a sky that does nothing. Some go quiet and empty, lying down in the sand to wait for the end. Others get moving, scraping supplies together, hunting water, throwing up shelters from sailcloth and the planks the sea spits onto the beach. And into that hole where authority used to be, with no one in charge and no one deciding anything, steps Cornelius. As under-merchant, the apothecary is now the highest-ranking company man left on the sand. Pelsart had taken the senior officers with him, and Jacobs too. The skipper who wrecked the ship and loathed the merchant saved his own skin in that same 9-meter boat, and his reckoning would just have to wait for Batavia. By the rulebook, Cornelius has every right to take command, and he takes it, behind a thin, democratic curtain. The survivors vote in a council, a dozen odd men meant to decide the group's fate together. The Frisian sets himself at the head of it. Then, over days and weeks, he quietly swaps the members out. The ones who argue, he removes. In come his own people, his partners from the shipboard plot, sailors who are easy to bend, soldiers hunting for someone strong to stand behind. He takes the weapons pulled off the wreck. He takes the boats. He brings in rationing, and now anyone who wants to eat answers to the council, and anyone who wants to drink answers to the council. On paper it all sounds sensible. In a crisis you centralize control. You ration the food. You keep discipline. The trouble is, the apothecary does not want to save these people. He wants fewer of them. Cornelius has run the numbers. The supplies will only stretch to so many mouths. Any rescue ship, if one ever shows up, will be small, a yacht or a schooner, something that holds a few dozen, not 200. So the head count has to come down to 40, maybe 50. Then the rescue ship gets taken, its crew dealt with, the silver brought up from the wreck, the chests still down there, under the coral and the ballast. Sail off somewhere the company will never find them, and set up a kingdom of their own, with silver enough to buy a whole island and men loyal to the grave. Talking ordinary people into killing on that scale, that is the hard part. The apothecary reaches back for the ideas we met in Harlem, the libertine creed of Terentius, whose circle he is supposed to have moved in. Disciple or just a borrower? He puts the doctrine to work now. He and his inner circle are the chosen ones. They have seen reality for what it really is. Morality, they know, is a made-up thing. Strength is what makes the law out here. There is no God watching this place, and no court that will ever hear of what happens on it. Only the will and the blade. Pelsart later wrote down what one of the mutineers confessed, that Geronimus swore on his own soul no man who signed himself under his command had anything to fear. The logic was turned inside out. Sign on with the killers and you live. Refuse and you do not. The selecting begins. Step 1 is to spread out the people who might fight back. Cornelius sends groups off to other islets around the archipelago, officially to look for food and water, really to get them out of the way before the killing starts. 24 or so soldiers, led by a corporal called Weber Hayes, get sent to a western island sitting out on the horizon, 8 or 9 kilometers off. The apothecary tells them to go find water. He is sure they will find none and die of thirst out there. And to make certain of it, he takes their weapons off them before they go. Muskets, pistols, sabres, every last blade stays back on Beacon Island. The soldiers cross over with nothing. Other groups get shipped to smaller islets, the weak ones, the sick, the ones nobody has a use for. They are told to wait for food deliveries. The deliveries never come. What comes instead is Cornelius's men with blades. Andrus Jonas, one of the main killers, laid out the details afterward, and Pelsart took down every word. They had sent him out on a big raft, Jonas said, to be rid of Hans Rader and Jacob Grunewald, and they tied Grunewald and let him go under. The water was quiet and it was efficient. You rowed a man out to deep water and tipped him over the side with his hands and feet tied. No screaming, just a gurgle and then nothing. The water was in his mouth before he could call out. No blood either. The sea took the bodies and left no mark. On the 4th of July, Jan Cornelis, Thomas Wenzel and Hendrik Jans went over the side. The next day, more of them. Before long, killing in numbers was simply the routine. Each of the killers had his own way of working. The water was the quiet option, good for small numbers, for one man at a time, for when you wanted it done without fuss. The knife was faster but messier, and afterward there were hands and blades to clean. The heavier work, with sword and axe, did the job on bigger groups, but it took muscle and it left marks on the sand. Andries Jonas was the drowning man. David Zevank preferred the knife. Lennart Michiels went with the sword, and 300 years on, archaeologists will find the print of his blade on a skull. Around the middle of July, the apothecary ordered what he called a great cleansing. In a handful of days, dozens of people were killed off across the islets, men and women and children alike. Pelsart later set the number at about 125 lives taken. Not even faith bought you anything, as the preacher Gijsbert Bastiens found out, along with his wife and his 7 children. a preacher's whole household, a man of God, and his family. To Cornelius, the heretic who swore God did not exist, they were the perfect target. The old world made flesh, there to be torn down. Proof that the new order held nothing sacred that the old one had. Bastien's was made to watch. His wife went first, then the children, one after the other. The preacher stood there with nothing in his hands, ringed by armed men. In a letter that somehow survived, he wrote that they had all expected the end at any second, begging God for some mercy, and he cried out at the cruelty of it, a horror past anything he had words for. Only the eldest daughter, Judic, came through it, a teenager. She lived because she was young and good-looking. The apothecary handed her to one of his men, Konrad van Huysen, to keep, a reward for loyalty and a living reminder that he now owned every fate on that island, body and soul. What happened to the women on Beacon Island deserves a chapter of its own, and a silence of its own. In his journal, Pelsart put it down flatly. Geronimus kept Lucretia Jans for himself, and 3 of the others, Trintgen, Zussi Fredericks, Anneken Boskitas, he made over, in the words of the record, for common use. Lucretia Jans, the same woman the plotters had set on aboard the ship, ended up inside the apothecary's tent. She was there for 2 months. What went on in that tent, you can work out for yourself. The sources go quiet on the details, and that quiet says more than any sentence could. The other women were handed round among the rank and file, for common use, which meant any of them, by anyone. The word use sits there in the documents, with no quotation marks at all, as if these were tools and not people. After the rescue, they accused Lucretia of inviting evil, of collaboration, of being alive when other women were not, as though surviving were a crime, as though the victim somehow shared the blame for what was done to her. In the end they cleared her, but the rumours followed her for years. She went back to Holland 6 years after the wreck, and then she drops out of the record entirely. Nobody knows what became of her. Nobody wrote it down. Among the dead was Macon Soers, a woman far along in pregnancy. Jonas's confession, written down by Pelsart, lays out her end with a flat, surgical calm. No feeling in it, no comment, just the facts. David Zevank, one of Cornelius's seconds, came over to Jonas and asked if he had a knife. Jonas said he did, but it was blunt. Zevank handed him his own and told him to deal with the women. Jonas walked over to Macon Soers. What she felt, watching a man come at her with a knife, Pelsart does not record. He did not need to. The blade was blunt. It did not do its work cleanly. The end did not come quickly. Cornelius and his men do not look like killers out of some horror story. They look like princes. They have pulled bolts of trade cloth off the wreck, the stuff bound for India, red silk, gold damask, purple velvet, cochineal that dyes fabric a deep blood crimson. The apothecary has it all sewn into clothes. His guard struts up and down the sand in those robes, blades at their belts, rings on their fingers. They eat like lords, meat off the wreck, wine out of the barrels, cheese from the cargo holds. They drink from silver cups lifted out of the cabins. Around them, the rest of the survivors are rotting in rags, starving and parched, and out of their minds with fear. None of that is an accident. It is a message, a picture of who is in charge here, who counts as chosen, and who is ballast to be tipped over the side, who lives in silk, and who dies in the dirt. Red silk against white sand and blue sky, the colours of an empire Cornelius meant to be king of. The apothecary made his men swear an oath of loyalty. Swear it, and you got protection, food, water, a patch of shade, a chance at living. Refuse, and your name went on the list. Simple terms, swear or die. And the oath made you part of it. Once you gave it, it held you for good. No walking it back, no switching sides. Everyone who swore had blood on his hands, really, as the man holding the blade, or near enough, as the witness who stood there and let it happen. Whether people actually believed Cornelius's philosophy is another matter. Whether anyone really thought mass killing was no sin. Most of them, honestly, just wanted to live. Going over to the apothecary meant food, water, a shot at rescue. Refusing meant the list. This was not about theology, it was about biology. But some of them did believe. Andries Jonas, David Zevank, Lennart Michiels, Jacob Peters, and dozens more who went at the killing with an appetite that ran well past simply staying alive. One chronicler, writing it all down decades later, piled up details of a kind you do not repeat at the dinner table. Eyes, hands, one man silenced for good, and a killer standing over him with something in his fist, saying, "There, viper, you have finally stopped hissing." Picture an ordinary day on Batavia's graveyard, under Cornelis. Dawn came up around 6. The sun lifted off the ocean, red and low. The heat climbed by the hour, and by noon it was past 30 degrees, no shade anywhere. The apothecary and his closest men woke up in tents stitched from sailcloth, the only thing on the island that kept the sun off. They ate a real breakfast, salt meat out of the cargo, dry bread, a cup of rationed water, sometimes wine. The rest of the survivors, the ones still breathing, the ones not yet on the list, lay out on the bare sand. No shade, no food, no water. They waited for food, for water, for an end, for anything that would stop it. After breakfast, Cornelius pulled the council together. They went over the situation, sorted out the next moves, settled who was going to die that day. Some days they sent boats to the wreck for supplies, and every run brought back more treasure. Some days they put together a punishment party for one of the nearby islets. In the evening the mutineers feasted. Wine, music, women, the lot. The smell of roasting meat drifted out over the island, and the starving could pick it up from hundreds of meters off. Laughter carried over the water. On the other islets, people dying of hunger and thirst lay listening to it. Then the night came down. Total darkness. No lanterns, no fires lit. Only the stars overhead, the ocean muttering all around, and the bodies of the ones nobody had buried yet, going soft in the warm sand. West Wallaby Island sits 8, maybe 9 kilometers off from Beacon Island. Cornelius can see it on the horizon every single day, a dark smear on the line where the sea meets the sky. He calls it the High Island, for the little rises you can make out even from that far. And every day he is sure the soldiers he sent over there are dying of thirst. He is wrong. Weber Hayes and his men, 24 odd soldiers with nothing to fight with, find no water on the first day, nor the second. They comb the place shore to shore, dig down into the sand, hunt for any kind of stream. Nothing. Then, on the third day, or the fourth, the sources cannot agree, they find something they were not looking for. In a shallow dip in the rock, half hidden under low scrub, sits a pool of still water. Rain, collected in a natural basin. Fresh water. Not much of it, a few hundred litres maybe. barely enough to keep 24 men in drinking water, but enough to live on. And then they find something else. Pelsard later wrote down what they saw, half amazed and half not believing it. Small marsupials, cat-sized, built all wrong, a tail far too long, back legs far too long, front legs almost stubby. These are Tamar wallabies, little marsupials that live in the Australian scrub. Hayes's men have no idea what they are looking at. They have never seen anything like it. No European has. But they can tell straight away the things are good to eat. Hayes sets up hunts. No guns, just spears they cobble together and a few traps. The meat, dark and a little sweet, not far off venison, keeps his men alive. And while the people on Beacon Island are dying, of thirst and of worse, a small, working community is coming together on West Wallaby. They have water, they have food, they have a man in charge who knows what he is doing. Then the news reaches them. A few people who got away from Beacon Island, survivors who somehow lived through the killing on the other islets, make the crossing to West Wallaby. Half dead, terrified, carrying stories that sound like bad dreams. They tell it all. The apothecary, the council that picked who lived and who did not. Men tied hand and foot and put into the sea. The close work with the knife. Women handed round for common use. Children thrown into the water. A heresy that waved away every last crime. Hayes listens, and he understands. It is only a matter of time before Cornelius hears about them, and once he does, he will come. Hayes's camp is a problem for the apothecary's whole plan. A few dozen trained soldiers who have sworn no oath to anybody, who can fight back, who might reach the rescue ship first and tell the truth of it. So they get ready to defend themselves. West Wallaby has nothing in the way of natural defences. Flat and low, a few rocky rises, thick scrub further in. Bad ground to hold. But Hayes is a soldier. He knows even a bit of cover can decide who walks away. That half a metre of wall is sometimes the whole difference between a man and his grave. He gathers the others. They start building. Out of coral blocks and limestone slabs, stacked, dry, no mortar because they have none, they put up walls. The work crawls. Every block has to be found on the beach, hauled over, fitted into place. The stones are all different shapes, so it is like working a stone puzzle. The main building, the one archaeologists will later call the fort, runs about 3 meters by 8. 2 rooms, with walls thick enough to stop a musket ball. Smaller shelters go up close by, deeper into the island. Archaeologists today reckon it the oldest European building anywhere on the Australian continent. Thrown up by men fighting to stay alive, with no tools and no idea how to lay stone, with nothing but the will to live, and the certainty that behind these walls they would have to face down men with guns. The bigger problem was weapons. Cornelius had taken the soldiers' muskets, pistols, sabres and daggers off them before he sent them over. Everything a man could fight with. Hayes had whatever the beach gave him, driftwood, metal off the smashed barrels and crates, and stones. So the soldiers made do. Out of planks they cut shafts, long and straight and hard. To the shafts they bound 16-inch carpenter's nails, 40 centimetres of solid iron, scavenged off the wreckage the sea kept coughing up. That gave them pikes, rough, primitive, but they would kill a man. From the barrel hoops, the iron bands that held the staves together, they beat out points and edges. A knife made from a barrel hoop is no thing of beauty, but it opens a man up as well as anything from a forge. The same hoops gave them clubs, a length of wood with an iron band on the end, simple and savage, and it worked. They gathered sharp coral too. Coral is hard and brittle at the same time. It shatters into shards with edges like broken glass. Thrown hard, it cuts to the bone. A Stone Age arsenal. Pikes off nails, clubs off barrel hoops, coral and stone, all of it lined up against muskets and swords and a cannon. What counted was whether it worked, not how it looked. That, and surprise. In time, Cornelius worked out that the soldiers were still alive. He could see the smoke from their fires on the western island. He could see people moving about over there, the place getting stronger instead of dying off the way it was supposed to. First he tried talking. He sent boats over with letters, offers of peace, promises of wine and cloth which the mutineers had to spare, an invitation to come back into the fold, assurances that everything on Beacon Island was perfectly under control, that the ugly rumours were just malcontents stirring. Hayes sent nothing back. The apothecary sent more letters. The longer he dwelt on their old loyalty and their brotherly friendship, one of them went. The stranger it seemed that men who had set off so gladly at the merchant's request to scout the high island would not now come back and report in. Smooth words, polite enough, and underneath the threat, anybody who would not play along was an enemy. Hayes held his silence. He knew what Cornelius had done on Beacon Island. He knew exactly what the apothecary would do to him and his men. No fine words and no promises were going to change a thing. By the end of July, Cornelius had run out of patience. If talking would not do it, that left force. The first try at an assault was a mess. A few of the apothecary's men rowed up in a boat, probably a little skiff, meaning to put a raiding party ashore. They had muskets, they had swords, they had the better weapons by a mile. Hayes's men did not sit and wait on the beach. They waded straight out and hauled the boat into the shallows. In water up to the knee, then up to the waist, a musket is a useless thing. Before a mutineer could even reload it, pour the powder, tamp it down, seat the ball, tamp again, prime the pan, put the match to it, there was a pike in his belly. The attack was thrown straight back. The mutineers pulled away with wounds and with shame. The second attack came in harder. More boats, more men. Cornelius was learning from what went wrong. This time the mutineers tried to swing around the fort from the side, land where the defenders could not see them, slip up through the scrub, hit them by surprise. But Hayes had put out sentries, and he had stones. His men rained coral down on the attackers, sharp as razors, edged like glass. Several of the mutineers took it in the face and the hands, blood running into their eyes, fingers that would not do what they were told. They fell back. Every time, the defenders lost fewer men than the attackers did. The walls held, and those homemade weapons kept proving deadlier than anyone on the other side had bargained for. Which left Cornelius with a problem. Hayes's camp was turning into a symbol, a sign that you could say no to the apothecary and live. Every day Hayes drew breath, ate into Cornelius's grip on Beacon Island. Every beaten-back attack said the same thing. The chosen ones were not unbeatable after all. Think about what those soldiers were carrying. They were professionals, trained for a fight. But the men on the other end of the pike were their own countrymen, Dutchmen, same as them. Men they had been sharing a deck with a few weeks back. Maybe they had played cards with them, split a bottle of wine, talked about the homes they were all going back to. Now they had to put them down. or be put down themselves. That has to sit heavy on a man. The enemy spoke Dutch. That was the part that cut deepest. They knew what the apothecary had done to the ones who did not resist. They had heard it from the people who got away, the drownings, the knife work, the children. They fought because they had no choice. They killed because they had no choice. And then they had to go on living afterward. Maybe Hayes gave them speeches. Maybe he kept them steady with talk around the fire. Or maybe he just led from the front, calm and unmovable, and let that do the work. The sources do not say. All we know is that his men did not crack, that they held the fort for weeks, that they never gave it up. In September, the apothecary changed his approach. Not force this time, a trick. He sailed over to West Wallaby himself. He brought presents, wine and cloth and trinkets off the wreck. He played the negotiator now, not the attacker. He wanted to talk, to buy the soldiers off, to bring them over to his side. It was a mistake. Cornelius never understood Hayes. He could not get his head around men who believed in anything past their own survival, could not picture a loyalty with no price on it. He assumed every man could be bought, because the only men in his world were ones who could. Hayes listened to the offer. He nodded along. He asked for a minute to talk it over with his men. And then he gave the signal. The soldiers threw themselves at the mutineers. It was finished in about the time it takes to breathe. Cornelius's bodyguards, 2 of them, maybe 3, the sources cannot agree, were down dead or dying before they got near their weapons. And the apothecary himself, the man who had held total power over every living soul on those islands for the best part of 3 months, went face down in the sand. They tied him with rope. They hauled him into the camp like a caught animal. Now Hayes had a hostage, the best hostage there was, the head of the snake. He could trade him, he could finish him, he could do whatever he wanted with him. For now, he kept him breathing. Cornelius alive was worth more than Cornelius dead, a bargaining chip and a kind of insurance that the men on Beacon Island would not throw everything at the fort at once. But the rest of the mutineers were still out there, and they still had muskets. Command on Beacon Island fell to Wouter Loos, younger than Cornelius, not as charming, not as sharp, but more stubborn. He understood that without the apothecary, the whole plot was basically finished, because he himself had no talent for working people, no clever philosophy to sell them. And he understood the other thing too. If Hayes got to the rescue ship first, and a ship had to come eventually, every mutineer on the island would hang. No exceptions, no mercy. That left exactly one move. Attack again. For real this time, with everything. On the 17th of September, Loos pulled together everyone who could still fight. This time, he planned it more carefully than Cornelius ever had. He brought every working musket he could lay hands on, at least 2 of them, maybe more. He brought powder and shot, and he aimed the attack at the side where the fort walls sat lowest. The attack came at first light. The boats slid into shore. The mutineers sat down in the shallows, keeping their distance this time, and opened fire. Musket balls whined over the walls. They cracked into the coral blocks. They spat off again in little clouds of dust and chips. One of Hayes's men went down, then a second, then a third. This was the moment it could all turn. The muskets were finally doing their job. Fire from a distance, the one thing the fort had no answer for. All the defenders could do was press in behind the walls and wait. Wait for the powder on the other side to run dry. Or for their own people to run out first. And then somebody shouted. Out on the horizon, where the sea ran into the sky, a sail had come up, a white triangle against the blue, small enough to hide behind a thumb, close enough to know exactly what it was. It was the Sardam, the rescue ship. Pelsart was coming back. Act 4. Both sides saw the sail in the same heartbeat. Both knew exactly what it meant. Whoever got to the ship first owned the story. Whoever told his version first walked away alive. Whoever came in even a minute behind would spend the rest of his life talking his way out of the other man's account. Luce called off the attack. No point to it anymore. In a few hours he would be a hero or a man on the rope. He ran for the boats. His men rowed like the devil, straight at the Sardam. Hayes did the very same. He left the wounded and the dead where they lay. He left Cornelius under guard. He grabbed a few men and the fastest boat he had. The race ran maybe an hour, maybe 2. Hayes had the smaller boat, but the hungrier crew. They rowed like their lives hung on it, because they did. They won it by minutes. By the time Luce reached the Sardam, Hayes was already talking to Pelsart, telling him all of it. The apothecary, the council that decided who lived and who did not. More than 100 dead, men and women and children. The drownings, the knife work, the women handed round for common use, the teachings of Terentius that signed off on every crime, the red silk and the feasting laid on beside the bodies. Pelsart listened and could not take it in. 4 months. For 4 months on the islands he had left in what he thought were safe hands, a slow and methodical killing had been going on. And then he gave the order to arrest the mutineers. Over the next few weeks, a trial of sorts ran on the islands. Pelsart had no real court to work with, no judges, no lawyers, nothing you would call a courtroom. What he had was a beach, a tent, and a few company men, and 17th century law, which counted torture as a perfectly normal way of getting at the truth. The method they called the water treatment meant funneling huge amounts of water down the throat of the man being questioned. The belly filled and stretched until the pressure was unbearable. The feeling of drowning without ever going under. Pain and no blood to show for it. So the mutineers talked. Everything the questioners wanted to hear. The truth as well. And lies. And things nobody really wanted to know. Cornelius, the man who for 3 months had decided who lived and who died, now stood in front of the court himself. Pelsart wrote that he could not make his peace with dying, would not repent, would not pray, would not show a flicker of remorse. Right to the end, he believed his own philosophy, or did a very good job of pretending to. The sentences came on the 2nd of October. They were carried out the same day, over on Seal Island. 7 men went to the rope. Cornelius first, with both hands already taken off him moments before. Jacob Peters drew worse, the wheel, the hardest end the law had, kept back for the worst of them. They laid the condemned man out on a great wooden wheel, and the work was slow, and it started at the feet, and the rest you can picture without my help. The end took hours. Jan Hendricks and Lennart Michiels, a hand taken, then the rope. Matti Speer, Alert Jans, Rutger Fredericks, straight to the gallows, quick, no ceremony. 7 men, the first Europeans ever put to death on the Australian continent. 2 of the condemned dodged the rope. Wouter Loos, who had led that last attack, and Jan Pelgrom de Baai. The second was only 18. Maybe that is why Pelsart went easy on them. Maybe he had reasons of his own. He put them into a boat with a little water. He gave them buttons and knives, and a few trinkets, things they might trade with the locals. And he had them set ashore on the Australian mainland, probably somewhere near the mouth of the Hutt River. They were to make contact with the people there. They were to survive in a world they did not know, with no weapons, no map in their heads, no way home. They became the first Europeans to settle on the Australian continent, for good and against their will. What became of those two, nobody knows. No one ever saw them again. Local legend has it that in the 19th century, British settlers came across Aboriginal people with fair hair and blue eyes. The geneticists are doubtful. The DNA studies turn up no European line, but the legend hangs on anyway. Maybe the two of them were dead inside a week. Maybe they lived for years out there. Maybe they had children who had children of their own. Nobody wrote it down. Nobody ever went to check. Pelsart sailed back into Batavia with 116 survivors. He brought back 10 of the 12 chests of silver, the last two still down on the wreck under the coral, and tons of lead ballast. He brought back the old cameo, which had somehow come through it all. He brought back his journal, the whole thing written out in his own hand. And he brought back a weight he would carry the rest of his days. A year later, Pelsart was dead. The sickness he picked up on that longboat trip had wrecked his health for good. Or maybe it was his conscience, the people he had left behind, the ones who died while he was away. He died in Batavia, a long way from home. Jacobs, the skipper who put the ship on the reef, and very likely helped set the whole plot in motion, was arrested back in Batavia and thrown in prison. What happened to him after that is murky. He probably died in his cell before anyone got around to a proper trial. Lucretia Jans got back to Holland 6 years after the wreck. She had the rumours and the accusations waiting for her. They cleared her of collaborating, but rumours do not die as cleanly as court cases do. After that, she slips out of the record. Nobody knows where she lived, whether she ever truly came back from it, or when she died. The preacher Bastiens, the man who stood there and watched his wife and 6 of his children die, lived through it. He went home to Holland and back to the service of God. How he carried memories like that, nobody knows. Whether the God he had preached his whole life gave him any comfort at all. Whether he kept his faith after watching his family die for another man's heresy. History does not say. Then there is the portico, 137 blocks of sandstone, cut in the quarries at Bentheim. A triumphal gateway that was supposed to greet visitors at the front door of the Dutch Empire on Java. It never got there. It sat on the ocean floor for more than 300 years. Buried in sand, grown over with coral, forgotten. Until archaeologists from the Western Australian Museum brought it up, 1 block at a time. They laid the pieces out by the mason's marks cut into the stone, and they built it back up. Today it stands in the museum in Geraldton in Western Australia, an empty frame nobody will ever actually walk through, a gate to nowhere, a monument to an ambition that went down with the men who were meant to raise it. Tourists pose for photos under the arch. Not all of them know what these stones cost. On Beacon Island, back in the 1960s, archaeologists turned up a skeleton. The Western Australian Museum catalogued it as BIB-14, a man, somewhere between 35 and 40. Heavily built, someone who had spent his life working with his body, and a wound on the top of his skull where a blow had come down. During the dig, one of the archaeologists spotted something odd in the sand next to the skull. a small splinter of bone about the size of a teardrop. It did not seem to match any part of the skeleton. They carried it back to the lab. They held it up against the hole in the skull. It fit, exactly. That little piece, knocked loose at the moment of the blow more than 300 years before, had lain in the sand beside the man it came from all that time. Nobody had touched it. Nobody had moved it. It lay exactly where it dropped at the moment he died, and it slotted back into place as if no time had passed at all. The bone backed up the chronicle. The blow had come straight down, from above, into a man standing or kneeling and facing forward when it landed. The rest you have to picture for yourself. A man with a sword stepping closer, the blade going up, and nowhere left to run. We do not know his name. We do not know whether he was one of the mutineers, put to death on Pelsart's order, or one of the victims, killed on Cornelius's. Both are possible. Both end in the same patch of sand. On Beacon Island, on Batavia's graveyard, archaeologists reckon dozens more skeletons may still be down there in the sand. Dozens of stories nobody will ever hear. People who had names, who had families, who had plans for their lives, and who stayed behind on this scrap of land that turns up on no map, in graves nobody ever marked. The wreck of the Batavia lies where it has lain since the 4th of June that year, on Morning Reef, a few dozen kilometres off the Australian coast. Coral has grown over what is left of her. Fish drift through the holes where the guns used to be. The silver has been brought up, most of it. The stones, all of them. The bones, some. But the story stays. A ship that set out for paradise and found the other thing entirely. People who had it all, money and power and weapons, and used the lot to wipe each other out. A philosophy that swore there was no such thing as sin, and the crimes it talked men into committing. The Batavia is not really a story about the sea. It is about what people turn into when the rules come off, when there is no law and no court and nobody to answer to, when the only thing holding a man back is whatever he can imagine and how badly he wants to do it. Geronimus Cornelis was not a monster. He was an apothecary from Haarlem, educated, eloquent, clever, a man who read books, ran a shop, had a wife and a child. And that is the part that gets under your skin. Monsters come out of perfectly ordinary places, towns with cobbled streets and church towers, shops that smell of herbs and dried spice, the heads of people who look exactly like you or me. All it takes is the right moment, the right philosophy, the right scrap of land where nobody is watching, and a blunt knife. If this one stays with you, hit the like and subscribe to the channel. Tell me in the comments whether you had heard of the Batavia before this, and tell me what you make of it, that the first European building in Australia was a fort thrown up by men defending themselves from killers. Tell me as well what you want to hear about next. If your comment pulls in enough likes, that is the next film. Thanks for listening. Thanks for being here. See you in the next one.